So copyright, in the U.S. we think of it as mostly as a very as an economic kind of structure. It's a way to make sure that creative people get compensated for their work, that they can earn a living. Over in Europe, they think of it as more of has a more of a moral dimension to it, and this is something that I wanted to explore with you guys a little bit. They sometimes call it not copyright, but right of the author, or artistic and literary property. So to many people, this is a dry, boring, technical area of law that doesn't really get into everyday life all that much. If you actually look at the U.S. Copyright Act, it's a couple hundred pages. And if you were to open to a random page, you'd see things like the size of TVs that can be put in restaurants, or the number of songs by a particular artist that a satellite radio station can play in an hour. It's not well understood. There are a lot of misnomers about it, too. A lot of people think that copyright law protects attribution, that it guarantees your right to have your name associated with your work. Turns out it actually doesn't. The U.S. Supreme Court specifically said that it doesn't, except in a few small cases involving certain kinds of visual artists. But it also inflames a lot of passion in people. And we saw this a couple of times already this year. It is, as one example was Google Books. Google, this was going on 8 years ago now, decided that they were going to scan and digitize every book in several major university libraries and make them all searchable on the internet for free, and that they'd provide just little snippets of text in response to searches. Just an amazing amount of vitriol and fear and anger about this. The publishers and authors sued Google, and that lawsuit is still going on, although they reached a settlement with major publishers last week. But just the idea that a company, a major global company, could take someone's writing and without payment, without permission, and profit from it, make it part of this big sort of mechanistic system, that really was kind of a personal insult to a lot of people. And that's I know a lot of you are creative professionals, and so I don't need to tell you this. This probably just resonates with you, that to have somebody take your work without your permission to use it, claim credit for it, for academics, so people using someone's ideas without giving them credit, it's an economic problem, but it also it feels like a personal violation in many ways, and I probably don't have to tell you that it's obvious to most of us, but wanted to compare that to some similar things on the other side. There's the other side of a coin, and that's our personal interest as readers, listeners, viewers, the person experiencing creative work. I should back up and say copyright is what protects creative work. Patent law is what protects useful inventions. Some things kind of fall in a gray area in between, like fashion design. But certain things that we think of not as an economic transaction, but as part of ourselves, as personal growth, personal experience. Reading a book, loaning a book to a friend, introducing a loved one to a favorite band, watching your favorite TV show, but watching it at the time you want to watch it. The ability to do all of those things privately. These are all part of self-expression. These are all part of the things that we do to say to others, here are the things that define me. This is a book that had a great influence in my life. This is a song that got me through a tough time. It's to be able to experience those things in our own way, but also be able to share those experiences is something that I think we all consider a personal right, a personal part of who we are. And then there's a third side of the coin. Oh, whoops, my metaphor broke. That's that there isn't necessarily a really firm boundary between an artist or author and reader or viewer. Digital technology especially has tended to blur those lines. And I'll give some examples. Fan fiction, people writing stories using the characters from their favorite books and movies. This is an enormously prolific genre, a whole different genres of fan fiction, especially on the internet. Now, a lot of it's crude, a lot of it is pretty bad writing, but it is very much a way to personally interact with the characters that inspire people, and to share that interaction. Now, arguably, all of it violates copyright law. Some people sue over it, some people don't, some people encourage it. The best-selling book right now, 50 Shades of Grey, actually started as fan fiction based on the Twilight series of books. So sometimes this turns around and becomes commercial, becomes really bringing something new into the world. And it's not new. There are, and I looked this up, 242 published works of fan fiction based on the works of Jane Austen. The first was published in 1913. It was called Old Friends and New Fancies, an imaginary sequel to the novels of Jane Austen. So this isn't new. I mean, in a sense, it's all based on the oral tradition where every storyteller added something new to a sort of a communal piece of fiction that became everyone's property. But digital technology is really kind of bringing it back. A couple of other quick examples. The appeal of jam bands and concerts in small venues. There are people who say the value of that and the reason why people will pay so much for that is to feel like they are part of the process of a song being made. So that it is a musician and an audience together collaborating to create something new. And to be part of that is valuable. And then I'll mention, because this is my background, free and open source software. Also a kind of a genre of creative works. Software is creative, software is covered by copyright law, but it's funny because it's also useful. It is both creative and a useful object, but it falls under copyright law. And open source software is based on the idea of, every user is a programmer. You have software that you're using to enhance the value of the devices that you use, and you're going to improve it as you go, just to do the things that you want to do and need to do, and you'll share those improvements with others. But again, this is about you copying and modifying the work of somebody else, which, all else equal, is violating a copyright. The copyright is really based on this idea of there are authors, there is sort of the lone genius in a room working their magic, bringing something new into the world, and then there are consumers. But again, those lines are starting to blur. Copyright is all about the first of those three things, as we think of it generally. So we understand the personal insult, the sort of the personal violation that would come from somebody taking an author's work without permission. What I submit to you is that putting restrictions, rules, toll booths, payment on those, on the rights of a viewer, a reader, the person experiencing a creative work, is another kind of violation of personal autonomy, which is sort of part and parcel of the same thing. And then I think we can think of copyright in the terms of protecting the sort of personal sovereignty of the artist and the personal sovereignty of the viewer. And I'll give some examples of things where those that personal circle is invaded. You own a book, but you can't lend it to a friend. You own an album, but you can only listen to it in certain places. These are all real, by the way, or have been suggested by media executives. You have to watch TV shows when they're broadcast. So basically, we're back to the 1970s. If you want to watch them again later, you have to pay for that privilege. You have to watch the commercials. Can't get up and make a sandwich during the commercials. You may think I'm making this up, but there was an executive of Turner Broadcasting about 10 years ago said, anytime you skip a commercial, you are actually stealing the programming. Also, there's a lawsuit going on right now that says it isn't actually directed at TV viewers, it's directed at Dish Networks, the satellite company, but it's based on the premise that skipping commercials is illegal. And then another one, again, going back to the software world, being told you can't alter the software on devices that you own. So many of you were probably like me. The iPhone has probably become a sort of like an appendage of your body. It's how we plan our lives. It's how we do a lot of our communicating. It's become an extension of our personality, but someone else controls the functioning of that device, not us. Apple decides what software can go on that device, what it can do, what it can't do. It can track your location. It can collect information about you, which Apple can then use or sell. This, too, I think, feels like a violation of personal sovereignty to a lot of people. And that, again, is enforced by copyright law, or copyright law gone too far. Legally, there's a lot of back and forth on these things. There's a lot of litigation, and I'm not going to get too into the weeds on this. Cases go one way, cases go the other. There's kind of a tacit recognition in a lot of cases that there is personal sovereignty for the consumer, for the reader, for the viewer. It just really isn't said in those terms, but in many cases it's there. But I wanted to sort of talk about it from the point of view of ethics, because this is a level where we all are engaged or should be engaged. Public discourse on copyright law, what you read in the papers and what you hear about, it starts from a very simple premise, that copying someone's work without permission or making a commercial use of somebody else's work without permission is stealing. Thou shalt not steal. End of story. It's very simple. It makes sense, but it doesn't take into account the personal sovereignty issues that I was mentioning, and especially in the digital world, because every use of something in the digital world makes a copy. Even looking at a web page, if you go to whatever.com and look at a web page, just by doing that you've made copies. That touches copyright law. We don't think of that as stealing. You've made copies, but we ethically and just as thinking people, we wouldn't call that stealing. It doesn't feel like it, but I'll give some of the other examples I mentioned. Loaning a book. Loaning a book doesn't feel like stealing, but if it's an e-book, you have to make a copy to do it, or break the encryption on the e-book, or do various things that actually do, in many cases, violate copyright law, but ethically, it doesn't feel wrong to us. Now, reasonable people disagree, and there are outer limits. I'll get closer to them a little bit, So, personal uses. You've bought one copy of a song, but you want a copy for your house and one for your car. You're not selling it. You're not giving it away, and you certainly could buy 2 copies of it, but most people, I think, wouldn't consider it stealing if you just make a copy for your car. Now go a step farther, making a copy and sharing it with a close friend. Because, hey, here's a song that really had an influence on my life. This takes me back to a time in my life. I want you to know me, so I want you to know this song. That feels right to people. That doesn't feel like stealing. Now, sharing that song with 500 friends on Facebook, maybe not so much. I think most people would draw the line inwards of that. But these are all things that seem that our personal ethics probably wouldn't define many of those things as wrong. And so thou shalt not steal just doesn't get us there. It doesn't define ethics in this area. So, I don't claim to have the answers here, but there are maybe some building blocks of a personal ethics around using creative works, and I think some of those building blocks are just recognizing that the author has a moral right, and the consumer or viewer, listener also has a moral right, that not every copy or adaptation without permission is wrong, that personal use is probably not wrong, personal non-commercial use, even if it involves copying or adaptation or fan fiction or imagining a different ending to the movie or maybe writing it down, maybe sharing it. And again, here we're getting into the gray area, but sharing with friends, sharing with a group, as long as that group has some reasonable boundary on it. Maybe those are the building blocks of a digital ethics, which the law hasn't really caught up with yet. And then can technology encourage these ethics? This is sort of a question wrestled with by a lot of science fiction writers: is can you teach ethics to a machine? Can our computers, our phones, our car stereos, what have you, can those all enforce these sorts of rules in a reasonable way? This has been tried, of course. Originally, like the Apple iTunes music store severely locked down all of the music that it sold. You could only install it on so many devices. You couldn't share it. You couldn't copy it. You can try to get a little bit more sophisticated, a little more subtle. The most ambitious example right now is a technology called ultraviolet, which is a collaboration of several movie studios and technology companies. The idea is you can buy a movie on DVD or by download, and when you buy it, you get the right to download it to multiple devices. I think you can put it on up to 6 devices or share it with up to 6 people. I think the question then becomes, because you can't teach ethics to a computer, suppose there is a 7th person who you really want to be able to see that movie. Suppose the rules of this system, whatever they are keeping you from making some personal use that feels right to you. If you go ahead and do that use, is that wrong? Just because you violated the rules of the machine, you bypassed the cop, does that make it wrong? That's sort of the question. Computers aren't good at making ethical calls. So just real quick, I'll mention a couple of current examples where these are coming to the front. I mentioned Google Books, music sampling, especially in hip-hop music. The use of short samples from other songs as the building blocks of a totally new and different song. A lot of cases you can't tell where the original sample came from, but there's a huge amount of litigation in these things. Again, is that right or is it wrong? Should it be paid? Should there be permission? Should artists be free? And then again, software. Should you have full control over the devices that you own? Is that wrong? Are you violating the rights of the author, or is the author violating your rights if the devices that you have don't obey someone else? Those are the sorts of issues that we deal with every day. I find them interesting, and I hope they're enlightening to you as well. So thank you very much.